think this was one of the questions really at the core of our book, wasn't it, Julie? Because we were always debating, is this just an easy, quick, lazy way of showing that women were oppressed, or getting more conversation about your episode, or stirring up ratings? You know, it's just a kind of abuse by the people making the programme of real life horrors? Or is this actually a really necessary reminder that this has happened to women and men, you know, throughout human history, and we didn't talk about it enough, we didn't acknowledge it enough, and now these shows at least are showing us, you know, you can't turn away from this anymore. We need to kind of acknowledge this has happened and that people have suffered, and we need to try and change it.
Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Amorous Histories. I'm Annie, thank you for joining me. If you like the vibes, you can follow me wherever you get your podcasts and on social media. I'm at Amorous Histories on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and TikTok, and at Amorous Hist Pod on Twitter. You can like, share, comment and all of that good stuff. Transcripts and sources for each show are available on the website amoroushistories.co.uk, along with links to the bookshop.org affiliate accounts and some other goodies. Today is a special episode as I have Dr. Julie Taddeo and Dr. Katherine Byrne joining me to talk about their 2022 book, Rape in Period Drama Television, Consent, Myth and Fantasy. Please note that we'll be talking about rape and sexual assault throughout this entire episode. If that is not something you wish to listen to, please stop me now and move on to another episode. For those of you still here, thank you for listening. It is a hard but important subject, and I'm so pleased when Julie reached out to talk to me about it. Dr. Julie Taddeo is a research professor of British history at the University of Maryland in the USA. She has published multiple books and articles on topics including the Bloomsbury Group and British modernism, the British novelists Catherine Cookson and Anne Perry, Steampunk, and what we'll be talking about today, British period drama TV. Her books include Upstairs and Downstairs, British costume drama television, from the Forsyth Saga to Downton Abbey, and Steaming into a Victorian Future, a steampunk anthology. She is interested in how we can use popular culture to discuss issues of class, gender, sex, and race. Julie has been interviewed by the New York Times and the BBC, to name but a few, and frequently gives public history talks. Dr. Katherine Byrne teaches English at Ulster University in Northern Ireland and has published many books and articles about period drama, Victorian literature and medicine, women's writing, and the Gothic. She has been interviewed about Bridgerton and Downton Abbey for Cosmopolitan magazine and the Financial Times, among many others. She is author of Tuberculosis and the Victorian Literary Imagination and Edwardians on Screen, from Downton Abbey to Parade's End. Julie and Katherine have worked together on publications including Conflicting Masculinities, Men in Television Period Drama, and Diagnosing History, Medicine in Television Period Drama.
So I am a professor at University of Maryland. I think I'm starting my 19th year, but I've been at places before that. So I'm sort of seasoned, and in the last decade, I've moved into this area of writing more about popular culture, especially period drama. Before that, I was doing sort of more traditional history. I specialized in the Victorian period, the Edwardian era, British modernism. But this was always my passion, even as a girl. And so it was really great to meet up with someone like Kate, who shared this, and we were able to turn it into, academic work.
Yeah, I mean, I teach literature, Victorian literature and women's writing at Ulster University, which is right in the north coast of Northern Ireland. And I met Julie a few years ago now, and straight away we had a kind of shared interest in period drama. And then Julie came up with this idea, because she kept noticing it from watching it, that these shows, which we had both written on previously in other subjects to do with the shows, but these shows were full of sexual violence. Once we started looking, Julie, they were everywhere, weren't they? Like, there was hardly a show. It felt like every day I was getting an email from Julie, who watches so many of these shows. Oh, here's another rape, and so we realized we had to do something about it. And Julie came up with this idea for the book that a book that could be 3 times as long as it is, because there's so much more sexual violence on period television that we were able to cover. We couldn't cover it all.
Yeah. At the same time, we couldn't make it too long, because I have to say that emotionally and personally, it was a very difficult book to work on. So when we got to that last chapter, it's like, all right, we have to stop.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I was reading the chapters that you sent me over, and having watched some of those dramas you mentioned, like Outlander and Harlots and Banished, and sort of recalling those scenes that you talk about, the rape scenes, and thinking how shocked I was when I first watched them as an audience member. And I don't think when you watch it as a casual audience member, you're not thinking that deeply about it. It's not expected either necessarily, especially in Harlots. I was not expecting to see that rape. I wondered, maybe to start off, do you think rape scenes are necessary in period dramas? Do you think they are needed? And if so, why?
I think this was one of the questions really at the core of our book, wasn't it, Julie? Because we were always debating, is this just an easy, quick, lazy way of showing that women were oppressed, or getting more conversation about your episode, or stirring up ratings? It's just a kind of abuse by the people making the program of real life horrors? Or is this actually a really necessary reminder that this has happened to women and men, throughout human history, and we didn't talk about it enough, we didn't acknowledge it enough, and now these shows at least are showing us, you can't turn away from this anymore. We need to kind of acknowledge this has happened and that people have suffered, and we need to try and change it. And that debate, I don't think we really came up with a solution to that. That's still kind of at the core of what we're talking about. Because in some cases it does feel real and important, and in other cases you think you're just exploiting this, to get more people talking about your show.
Yeah, there was the problem, I think, especially with a show like Outlander, that, the fans have called it Rapelander because it's just constant. And I always laugh and I think, well, do Claire and Brianna think that if they stay in the 1950s or 60s, rape won't happen there? Like, what is so idyllic about the past where they choose to stay and yet they repeatedly are assaulted? So it does create sort of this illusion that rape doesn't happen in your present. It's just something in the past, and it adds to the authenticity of women's history. And obviously we know that's not true. So that's problematic. But I think if it removes the subject, that would be an issue too, because some of the stories are central. If you have a show like Poldark, which features actually more on the women than the hero, the titular hero, rape is going to come into play at some point as either a servant, a wife, someone who is poor and powerless. If the problem comes into how they depict those rapes. So I think that's where we focus on, like, how did they do it? Why did they choose it this way? And then I think even more disturbing sometimes is the fan reaction, either refusing to see some of these as rapes, forgiving heroes who are good looking, because we love them so much, and blaming certain victims. Some are believable, some are good victims, and some just don't deserve our sympathy.
Yeah, that's what really struck me in some of the chapters where you're talking about Ross Poldark, about how Aidan Turner is obviously perceived as being very attractive. He's the hero of the piece, so therefore it's not possible he couldn't have possibly raped anyone. He doesn't commit rape. When you put them against the other characters who are less attractive, they are the rapists. The handsome, like you say, the handsome actor is not the rapist, and that really struck me. I'd never thought of that before, in terms of that, because the lead actor normally is always perceived as sort of handsome. So the fact that our audiences they're more forgiving of good-looking rapists it blows my mind, to be perfectly honest. But it's not surprising, because we see it every day in the current society, that young men who are seen as good-looking, white, middle class, have got a good future ahead of them. They couldn't possibly have committed rape or sexual assault. It wasn't them. And even if it was them, it's absolutely okay. Just, give them a telling off and send them on their way. So I thought that was really interesting. And what you said about popular actors playing rapists as well, and the impact that has on the perception of, was it a rape or wasn't a rape on TV.
Even when the characters themselves admit to it being rape, or the source, like in the original Poldark novels, Winston Graham, because there's 12 novels, over the years, the character himself thinks to himself what he did was wrong. His wife tells him what he did was wrong. Elizabeth tells him it was wrong. So we see how that developed, but not so in the way it's written in the show. Debbie Horsfield has said that, he's a man of honor. He couldn't possibly do such a thing. And I think it's interesting, though, how even what the author's intention was gets changed. Like Winston Graham is dead now, so his elderly son was like, "Oh, my father didn't intend this as a rape." Like, yes, he actually did. He was really ahead of his time, and he was writing some of these scenes in the 1970s with second wave feminism, and he was proud of that. So it's kind of troubling how we even, challenge what the original intent of that scene was, because we just can't believe it.
And I think that's one of the really good things about Harlots, because one of the messages of that show is pretty much anyone can be a rapist. You see Charlotte's lover, George, Sir George, just suddenly turns from this really ineffectual, kind of kindly, we sort of laugh at him, but he's so harmless kind of character. And then suddenly, in the flick of a switch, he's turned into someone who rapes her in her own bedroom. Even though she is someone he seems, to worship, or he's afraid of her, or both up to that point. So Harlots kind of has this message that you can't take it for granted. Violence is everywhere in our society, and given the opportunity, anyone can commit this kind of crime. It's all the more chilling because we don't see it coming, as you said earlier.
Yeah, especially with George, because he is he's almost a comedy character, isn't he? He's so laughable, and especially maybe for audiences who are not as au fait with 18th century history and fashion. It may be seen, he's wearing makeup, he's sort of like high fashion, and you're supposed to be laughing at him. So then when he rapes Charlotte, it's even more shocking than if a man who was, working class, wearing scruffy clothes, had a beard and scruffy hair. There's that perception that certain people don't commit rape, and we all know that's definitely not true.
When both characters know it's a rape or a sort of rape, and then it develops into a love story, that is really something that's so problematic. I mean, you mentioned Banished at the beginning, and we do write about it in our first chapter. And the actor, Joseph Milson, I mean, he's such a lovely man. We sent him a copy of the book. He posed with it on Twitter, and he still has these adoring fans who make this joke meme of offering his character the bag of peas, because that's what he gives Kitty, the woman, who he wants, who's already pretty much a penal colony slave anyway, so there's no consent, whether she's in love with him or not. But so the initial scene, there's no consent, and then she falls in love with him. And that has happened in a few of the storylines that we've seen, where rape becomes romantic and a love story.
And fans love that. That's what they seem to want to see, because we see so many comments on YouTube and, other places where fans are hoping for romance, even in the most unlikely and horrific places, as with Outlander. Some of the fans speculated after Bree is raped that she was going to have a long-term romance with her rapist. We were really shocked by that.
And relieved it did not happen.
I'm absolutely.
So that's the one time Outlander got it right. But in the other show that we mentioned, I'm not sure how many of our readers will be familiar with it, but the Berlin Dance School, which was a huge hit in Germany, it's the same story. It is a pretty brutal date rape, and a young woman is traumatized. But of course, it's the 50s. Nobody really takes it seriously, the people around her. And then ultimately, it does become a love story, this great love story. They fall in love and get married, and fans are so happy about it. So I'm not sure how powerful the Me Too movement was in Germany, because this was done post-Me Too. And so it's really hard to kill that idea that, well, even it was kind of brutal, ultimately we can change it into a seduction, and now they love each other.
And it helps that he's a very good-looking guy as well, of course.
Yeah.
Going back to what you were saying already, Annie, yeah.
Yeah, the rape turned seduction is obviously a massive problem, and it's used as a narrative device in itself, like especially with the Poldark Elizabeth, where there's that initial verbal no, she doesn't want it, and Poldark is being like really aggressive in the way that he's kissing her and the way that he sort of pushes her onto the bed. But then it's taken as, by a lot of people, it will be taken as consent that she stops and she allows him to keep kissing him. But so a lot of people are going to go, oh, it wasn't rape though, because she wanted it. And there's that blurring of the lines, that because there is that previous love between them, that it's not, he couldn't possibly be raping her. And then it's the same with, rape in marriage as well. Like, if there's that bond or pre-existing relationship, sexual, romantic, it's not possible to rape someone you've had sex with before, because they're, they've given their consent before. They're not allowed to remove that consent, especially in marriage. You talk about the fact that it's, given in a legal contract and is therefore assumed to be consent for the rest of their married lives, which is also, a bit mind-boggling, really.
I think that's what makes Poldark. It's one show that I've been obsessed with it since I was a girl. The books and the 2 adaptations. What I like about the 1970s adaptation is that the morning after, so we just see the throwing of the throws around the bed and that fade out. The morning after, they're both in bed together, and she looks angry, and she really doesn't forgive him in the later episodes. With the 2016 version, that by the end of the scene, before they fade out, she moans, she lifts her neck in a certain way, and then the next day she wakes up very happy. And that was, to me, was a very strange change for 2016, and I think that's why a lot of anti-rape activists and feminists really slammed the show on social media and in the British newspapers. So I love Kate wants to speak to that, because I think that and marital rape, are like 2 huge topics, because the other storyline in Poldark, the marital rape, is so brutal and it's ongoing. It's not a one-off event. So you can't say, well, maybe he was drunk, we'll forgive him. It's rape from the wedding night on, for like a couple of years. And he is a hideous character, and he has a weird foot fetish. So there's no way you could ever forgive him. Whereas Ross is so good looking and everybody loves him that you can. So, Kate, do you want to chime in on Poldark?
Yeah, well, I think in general, the most kind of key thing we noticed when we were researching this book are the myths, the rape myths that are still perpetuated by these shows. And absolutely, we've already touched on some of them, but they're things the shows reveal, but they're actually things people still believe in life beyond television. And that's what's really frightening here. This idea that maybe you can say no but mean yes has obviously been, the way of getting off many rapists. A legal loophole that has been used in our courtrooms, for example, and the debates around marital rape and whether it's actually okay or not to rape your wife. And we see this on screen, but we see it in real life as well. And there are other things kind of that these shows reveal, like the rapist is almost always a stranger. If it's a proper real rape, he's always a stranger. Even things like Downton Abbey, whereas actually in real life it would be much more likely that Anna would be attacked by a member of her own household, but it has to be this outsider figure. And those are damaging stereotypes as well, because they're not true, and they make people think, oh, was it not a proper rape because it didn't happen this way? If you're not beaten, is it not a proper rape? And quite often the violent crimes we see on screen, which are sort of not romanticized in any way, you can see this tend towards violence and no ambiguity. And in life, it isn't like that.
And we learned, too, that by going onto these message boards and social media, that not everyone sees these rapes the same way that we do. The Poldark bedroom encounter has been controversial on message boards, just talking about the novels. So even readers can't agree. The problem, too, in that story is that Elizabeth is sort of pitted against Demelza. Demelza's working class. She's the one that Ross, truly loves, and Elizabeth is wishy-washy and can't make up her mind. And when she marries George, everyone hates her. And that's a spoiler alert if anyone hasn't watched the series yet, but it isn't until, obviously, Elizabeth dies. Ultimately, it's the consequence of that initial rape. The actions she pursues all result from that night. And so when she dies in one of the later episodes, then fans kind of forgive her and finally realize that Ross is to blame. But if she hadn't died, I think they would continue to see Elizabeth in the wrong. And that's what comments on social media were. Oh, she wanted it. She's a harlot. She's a home wrecker. Which we have to hear those terms in the 21st century.
We still see this a lot as the kind of the end point of rape on screen. Either they marry, fall in love, marry, and it's a romantic end to this horrific rape narrative, or they die. You still see this a lot. I'm thinking of, again, it's a spoiler alert, but Promising Young Woman, if you've seen it, and ends in her death, and it's one of the things I saw as problematic about the film, because it feels like she never gets out of that victim status, and she has to die to make the ending, the resolution work. But that's quite damaging as well. There seem to be only those two possibilities quite a lot of the time for women.
Mm.
But not Outlander, happily, because Outlander, the most rapes of all, it's been criticised for using rape far too much as a plot device, but quite often it does show us a positive outcome where women get over their attack. They are survivors in the proper sense of the word. They're able to get on with their lives. They refuse to let it define them. And this Claire kind of sums this up very memorably after a terrible attack that she endures.
Yeah. And do you think, I think the different types of rape as well, because they are on TV, the different types of rape help people learn what isn't rape? Because reading some of the stats in your book, I was really shocked that audiences didn't perceive certain rapes as rape. And you think about your own, growing up, what you thought was rape compared to maybe real life experiences, and the sometimes grey nature of it. Do you think having rape on TV presented in a sort of real fashion will help people understand what rape and sexual assault really is?
Mm-hmm. It was shocking to see some of these studies that were done in the UK, Australia, the US, especially among young men in that 18 to 35 age group, who didn't agree that, for instance, violence in a relationship was problematic, that certain acts were not rape. That was very upsetting. But also, I think young women too. And I follow social media religiously, and I'm seeing in more conservative circles, especially religious circles, this idea that marital rape is just real rape. It is a duty that you owe, whether you want to or not. That is an idea that has not died yet. So I'm troubled by that. I am a good decade plus older than Kate. So I grew up in a household that, there wasn't cable TV yet. Whatever was on, we watched. And my mother, of course, was a much older generation, and we watched what she liked. If Gone with the Wind was on, we all watched it. I was supposed to think that scene is romantic, where he sweeps her up, the staircase. And I saw a lot of stuff like that on TV. And I went back and I watched a lot of these shows from the 70s and the 80s. And I was shocked by how many jokes about domestic violence, rape, date rape. Of course, I didn't process that as a young girl. And that's really troubling. Watching Poldark, I loved Robin Ellis, who played the original Poldark. He was like my dream man. And now I watch that scene and I'm so angry. So I do think it's important that especially young women see some of these scenes and understand that it is rape.
Yeah, I mean, things have changed, thank goodness, and they continue to change and evolve, absolutely from the way it was when we were younger. But we still have this real kind of obsession with what you could describe as the bad boy. I mean, if you forgive me, the T-shirt I'm wearing today, I'm wearing it ironically, of course, but as you can see, it says I love bad boys. And this hasn't gone away. This isn't just, a last century phenomenon, because we still have the romantic idea of this guy who we can tame, even though he's been horrible to women before. And he's always on the edge of doing something terrible, but maybe he never crosses that line, or he does cross that line, as we've seen in some of the shows we've mentioned, and we can forgive him and kind of rescue him again. And 50 Shades of Grey, obviously, it's not a period drama. And, he draws up a very complicated consent contract for her in those books and films. But it's the same idea. He's this kind of person with a secret. He can treat her quite violently, but that's romantic. And, this importance we attach to the bad boy figure is part and parcel of rape culture, really. And it's something that hasn't gone away over the years, amazingly. Maybe it will. Hopefully it will in the future, though.
I do think the reason that Outlander is important, even though it has too much rape, is that it does cover multiple male rapes. Mm-hmm. And it's not just men raping men. This idea that a woman can rape a man, that is a pretty important plot line. And the conversations that the men have with each other I think it's a good contrast to a lot of the toxic masculinity. Yeah, I know that term may be a little too outdated, but when these men can have these conversations and express what happened to them, and they're like, yes, you were raped. And so Bridgerton, I think fans are still divided on season 1, that act between Daphne and her husband, the Duke, that she doesn't allow him to consent in that final moment. And so there are all sorts of forms of violence against men that have often been treated as a joke, or it's just a prison drama. And I have seen a couple of period dramas that do treat male rape still as a joke. So I think that's important too, because men watch these shows, but women watch them too, and they have to understand that consent works both ways.
And I grew up thinking that you couldn't rape a man, that only women could be raped, until I was a teenager, and I was like, oh, holy crap, that's not the truth, and that men get raped by anyone, and it isn't just men who rape other men. And I think Outlander, it feels like it's almost even more shocking when Jamie is raped, because you don't expect to see it. Like, almost as a woman, there's almost that ingrained, you expect to see women be raped because, we're of less value, so we can be raped. That's absolutely fine. But then when Jamie is raped, and by an army captain, and also the brutality of that rape as well, it's purely out of power as well, and it's out of power, and there's obviously no romantic connotations there, and
it was one
it's
of
just
the hardest.
violent.
Yeah, that violence it's really visceral, isn't it? And it's one of the hardest, I think, shows we had to watch for the book, in terms of both the attack on Jamie and also later on Claire. Outlander does kind of really make you feel the horror of what's happening. And that's obviously difficult for viewers to watch, but it's also important because so many shows still, I hesitate to say it, but they eroticize rape. They show it in such a way, not even when it's meant to be a romantic, like with Poldark, but quite often it's still the male gaze. It's a beautiful young woman being attacked. And even though part of you is appalled, part of you is thinking these are beautiful bodies on screen. And the way the camera represents it becomes like a sex act rather than just an act of violence. I don't think Outlander does that in most cases anyway, but many other shows amazingly do. And that eroticization of rape is something, again, we can't quite get away from in the 21st century.
Yeah, I have to say, Jamie's rape, of course, it's so brutal. I think it goes over the top. The fact that he's such a manly man, that he could be brutalized, is shocking. But for me, the worst rape really was the season 5 rape of Claire. I guess he's just a couple of years younger than me when that scene happens. And we tend to think, that you reach a certain point, no one's going to want to rape you. And there was that whole discussion in my country during the presidential campaign with Trump, and he's been accused of so many sexual assaults. And now the women are older. Only people see old women like, oh, well, why would he want to rape someone who's old and ugly? And that's the joke he keeps making, ignoring the fact too that he did rape them when they were much younger. But this idea that older women can't be raped because rape is based on desire, this is something we have to move away from. And, the rape of Claire it is very brutal. It is difficult to watch. And she's at a point in her life where she's successful. She's inventing penicillin and servicing, the community as a doctor. And yet no one can escape this crime because the men want to put her back in her place, and they do it through rape.
Yeah, definitely. And what do you talk about Me Too quite a lot. And obviously in recent years, there's been quite a lot of books about the Me Too movement and about the film industry and sexual harassment in the film and television industry that's come out. Do you think that the impact of that movement is being seen on our screens, or do you think that over the coming years it will be seen more?
Yes and no. I think in the immediate aftermath of it, we saw that just in Outlander, the way that they treated Bree's rape, where it was more, as Kate, does it brilliantly. When she describes it, how they focus on all the people in that pub who are listening and smirking and can't be bothered to step in because who cares? And it is about how other people are complicit and not showing the rape itself. That was important. But I have to say, I'm really disheartened lately. I mean, the backlash against Me Too is very real in my country. I think it's real in the UK. Again, we see so many acts of violence against women being treated as a joke. The latest controversy over the Ripper and Company, this bar that gives you an immersive experience about, horrible murders, and it uses Jack the Ripper as like a logo to lure customers in. And even female customers are saying they think it's funny, like, oh, that was so long ago, who cares? And I do see that there were some dramas too, European dramas, that were period, but more recent, like going back to the 1990s or whatever, and there are scenes of brutal date rapes by friends. And the attitude was, you know what, just get over it. You were drunk. And I fear that that's what's happening, that now we're starting to sort of minimize the importance of these acts. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't think much is going to change, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it did feel like a moment, and then perhaps people forget very quickly. But in some shows, kind of especially sort of female-dominated, written and produced more by women, shows like Harlots, you can see they're trying to make you aware of rape culture more widely, so that a lot of these shows and our society generally make this just about an individual's problem. It's like it's just something that happens between, most often, though not always, a man and a woman. And it might be terrible, but it's just an individual thing. Whereas shows like Harlots show us that actually this is part of a whole society problem. It isn't just one man, and everyone's culpable. And that's exactly what Julie was saying as well about that Ripper, Bree and Outlander, because they're all complicit because no one intervenes, no one bothers to save Bree. And in Harlots, you can see that right from the top down, all these people contribute to, in that show, it's the sale of underage girls and the way in which they're abused. And everybody kind of knows and everybody keeps quiet. And there's an acknowledgement there, which I think only comes about as the conversations after Me Too, that our society as a whole is to blame. And it's not just about targeting specific people. Actually, we're all responsible. And we need to remind ourselves of that.
Yeah, the line in your book is that society as a whole is complicit in rape. And I think that's quite almost feels like an opinion that's ahead of its time. Because we do still see it as, like between two people almost, even if it's not. It's like their problem. Okay, keep it away. But especially in Harlots, where there's a whole ring, there's like a whole business dedicated to the rape of young girls. And you talk about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and all of those horrors that we sort of we don't think it happens nowadays. We go, oh, okay, so that was something in the previous centuries. We don't do that anymore. We know better. But it's not like it's constantly happening, and then people aren't held accountable either. So I feel almost relieved, Julie, that you agree that it's maybe not got better. Obviously heartbroken that it's not got better. But I think I can be quite pessimistic sometimes, or quite fatalistic, and I go, okay, great, we've had this Me Too movement or all of the other movements that have ever happened, but what is happening? I feel like we're regressing. It's heartbreaking to see the laws coming in America at the moment, in Florida especially, is just shocking. And over here, our government is doing its best to row back on really important laws for women and non-binary people and trans people, and yeah, you just sort of think, okay, really is it ever going to get better?
In my lifetime, I didn't think I would see, the overturning of Roe. And now state by state, they're passing these draconian laws that don't even allow for exemptions of rape, which were a joke to begin with, because you would have to prove it, right, in court. But by the time you could do that, it's too late for the abortion anyway. So that, there's no such thing as a deserving victim. And I just saw something really horrific this week. There are colleges that are just doing away with all their their DEI initiatives. They're closing their LGBTQ centers where students could go. And another university just got actual legal permission to do away with claims against sexual harassment. And I'm thinking, what's going on at that university that they have to allow for sexual harassment and not be prosecuted? So, yeah, I really do think there's a serious backlash against women, their bodies, that their bodies don't belong to them. And I don't see much changing in the years ahead.
Yeah, once you take away women's rights to one aspect of their bodies, you by implication, you're attacking another. It's frightening.
Yeah. And I think this will backfire on men, too. I think it will be, if these attitudes about sexual violence against women are treated so cavalierly, what about men who are victims? How will they feel about coming forward? And we know, of course, that violence against people who are trans, those are definitely escalating, and our country is promoting this whole anti-trans agenda. So it's very worrisome.
Yeah, I think I've managed to accidentally end on a really depressing note.
Sorry.
I'll try and change the mood. What have you got coming up in your future, academia-wise?
Well, we are currently putting together a book on the NHS on screen, so TV shows about hospitals, doctors, nurses, partly to do with the celebrations around the NHS's anniversary at the moment, but also because, of course, it's an ongoing problem and debate in the UK about the status and maintenance and importance that we all think it is important, the NHS, but our governments aren't necessarily prepared to fund that the way it needs to be funded. So we're just looking at its representation on screen, but that's going to be a lot of fun, but also, like the rape book, hopefully an important project politically as well.
I'm always doing something on the side with Bridgerton. I do a lot of public history talks, which are really quite fun. I can reach really big audiences. And this is a great way to convey history about race, class, gender issues. And I always sneak in something about rape. And I'm always impressed, too, because a lot of my attendees are in like a 50 to 75-year-old age group. And this stuff really resonates with them. And I was worried at first, like, I can't talk about that stuff. They want to hear it because they've witnessed all of this stuff, and some have shared their own experiences. So I'm excited about season 3 of Bridgerton and Queen Charlotte. It just allows for so many important conversations.
And yet it is fun, and it isn't hard to watch the way some of the shows we've had to get through in the past are.
Yeah. Awesome.
Don't bother me, I'm watching TV, it's for work.
Yeah, it's a hard job, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, I had to watch Sex in the City once for an essay, and I was like, oh no, I've just got
for you.
For you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, well, where can people get a copy of your book, Rape in Period Drama Television?
Okay. It is on Amazon, or you can go straight to the press, Roman and Littlefield. And I have a website, JulieTaddeo.com, where my other publications, and I've co-edited actually multiple volumes with Kate now. So I have a great partner in her, along with James Leggett, who's not here. He did not work on this particular book. But we're like the Three Musketeers. Serious drama.
Yeah.
Awesome. And what are your socials?
Well, formerly Twitter, now X. I'm Drama Men, because that was based on our Conflicting Masculinities book, and I just went with the handle. I like that one. So you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter at Drama Men.
Mine is so unwieldy. It's like Katherine and a number, but if you follow Julie, you'll see me there as well, and you can follow me there too, because we're always liking each other's messages.
I'm debating signing on to some new ones, but it took so long to get all my followers. I'm just tired now.
I know, mine's very I can't even remember it exactly, but it's there nonetheless.
Awesome.
But thanks to Twitter, that's how I found you, Annie, and your podcast, and I've listened to some of them. They're so enjoyable. So I'm really pleased that you had us. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. It's been good.
Thank you for coming on. It's been lovely to have you. And yes, for social media, connecting historians and nerds like us together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Thanks again to Julie and Katherine for joining me. You can find links to Rape in Period Drama Television, Consent, Myth and Fantasy in the episode description and on my bookshop.org accounts. I hope you found this episode interesting. Please feel free to DM or email me on amoroushistories@gmail.com if you have any questions, episode suggestions, or want to collab. If you like this episode, please leave Amorous Histories a kind review and some stars on your podcast app or website. You should be able to find me wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. You can follow my socials at Amorous Histories on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube and TikTok, and at Amorous Hispod on Twitter. Transcripts and sources are at amoroushistories.co.uk. So until next time, stay sexy.